Papa, she's my mama. The little girl's words punched Jack in the gut harder than any outlaw's fist. Hell, the kid was 4, tops. Couldn't remember her real mama's face clear. That beaten-down woman in the sack? Not her. But Sadie's imagination was a powerful thing. The townsfolk? They saw a sack of trouble, whispered about runaway brides and worse. They'd want Jack to hand her over, didn't know about the kindness blooming in Sadie's heart, or how this little girl would decide everything. They have no idea, not a clue. But you do, and that's the secret. Papa, she's my mama. The little girl's words punched Jack in the gut harder than any outlaw's fist. Hell, the kid was 4, tops. Couldn't remember her real mama's face clear. That beaten-down woman in the sack? Not her. But Sadie's imagination was a powerful thing. The townsfolk? They saw a sack of trouble, whispered about runaway brides and worse. They'd want Jack to hand her over. Didn't know about the kindness blooming in Sadie's heart, or how this little girl would decide everything. They have no idea, not a clue. But you do, and that's the secret. The Wyoming Territory in '92 wasn't easy on anyone, especially not those who were down on their luck. Jack Rollins knew that better than most. The death of his wife had carved a canyon in his soul, leaving him to raise Sadie alone on a hardscrabble ranch outside Red Willow. He poured all his love and attention into her, his only reason for pushing on. That dawn, the air bit with the coming winter as Jack and Sadie moseyed along their fence line, checking for breaks. The sun painted the sagebrush with streaks of gold and crimson, a beautiful lie masking the unforgiving land. Sadie, small and bundled in her warmest coat, trotted alongside Clover, Jack's dependable mare, her breath puffing out in little white clouds. "Papa, tell me about the stars again?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. Jack obliged, pointing to the few stars still visible in the lightening sky. He loved how her eyes lit up, mirroring the distant suns. It was a simple joy, stolen from a world that often felt devoid of it. They rounded a bend in the fence line and came upon a grove of ancient sycamores, their leaves a shimmering curtain of yellow. Something was wrong. Clover shifted uneasily, snorting and pawing at the ground. An unnatural lump lay beneath one of the trees, half hidden by fallen leaves. A burlap sack, ripped and stained, like a discarded thing. Jack reined in Clover, his hand instinctively reaching for the Colt peacemaker at his hip. "Stay here, Sadie," he commanded, his voice low and serious. He dismounted, his boots crunching on the frost-covered ground. The closer he got, the stronger the metallic tang of blood filled his nostrils. He knelt, his heart hammering against his ribs, and cautiously pulled back the edges of the sack. The sight that greeted him stole his breath. A young woman, pale and bruised, lay crumpled inside like broken doll. Her wrists were bound with rough twine, her clothes torn and dirty. A knot formed in Jack's gut. He'd seen cruelty before, but this felt different, colder. Sadie, defying his order, had crept closer. She peered over his shoulder, her eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Then, clear as a bell, her small voice cut through the morning stillness. "Papa, she's my mama." Jack froze, every muscle in his body tense. He turned to Sadie, his face a mask of disbelief. Her eyes, usually so bright, were filled with a desperate hope. A memory stirred in his own mind, a hazy image of his late wife, her kind face, her gentle touch. Sadie had been so young when her mother died, her memories fragmented and incomplete. Now faced with this vulnerable woman, her imagination filled in the blanks. He swallowed hard, pushing aside his own shock and disbelief. He couldn't dismiss Sadie's feelings, not when they were so raw and real. "Easy there, Sadie," he said gently, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's get her back to the ranch." He carefully lifted the woman from the sack, cradling her in his arms. She was light as a feather, too light. He placed his coat beneath her, protecting her from the rough fabric. Sadie climbed onto Clover behind him, burying her face in his back, her small body trembling. As they rode back towards the ranch, a sense of foreboding settled over Jack. He knew taking her in would bring trouble. The townsfolk of Red Willow were a suspicious bunch, quick to judge and slow to forgive. But he couldn't leave her to die. He just couldn't. By noon, the news had spread like wildfire. Neighbors gathered at the edge of his property, their faces etched with curiosity and suspicion. Mrs. Turner, the town gossip, was the loudest, her voice shrill and judgmental. "Found her in a sack, you say? Likely a runaway or worse?" Jack ignored the whispers and murmurs, carrying the woman into the barn. He laid her gently on a clean pile of hay, covering her with a worn quilt. Sadie hovered nearby, her eyes fixed on the woman's pale face. Deputy Harmon, a man known for his cautious nature, arrived a short time later, his face grim. "Jack, you know this ain't right," he said, his voice stern. "Bringing in a stranger like that, especially one found in such a state. People are saying you ought to turn her over to the authorities." Jack met his gaze, his jaw set. "She's hurt, Harmon. She needs help. I ain't turning her over to anyone until she can speak for herself." A tense silence fell over the group, broken only by the rustling of hay and the occasional snort from the horses. Jack knew he was going against the grain, challenging the established order. But something inside him, a deep-seated sense of compassion and protectiveness, wouldn't let him back down. He shut the barn doors, cutting off the prying eyes and whispered judgments. Inside, the air was warm and still, filled with the scent of hay and horses. He tended to the woman's wounds, cleaning them with gentle hands. He coaxed a few drops of water between her parched lips. Sadie sat beside her, stroking her hair, whispering words of comfort. "Mama," she murmured. "Mama, you're safe now." As dust settled over the valley, the woman remained unconscious. Jack sat vigil by her side, his rifle resting across his lap. He knew the townsfolk wouldn't let this go easily. They'd be watching, waiting for him to make a mistake. But he wouldn't give them the satisfaction. He would protect her, not just from the elements, but from the judgment and prejudice of a world that often forgot the meaning of mercy. He couldn't know who she was or what she had done, but he did know she needed him, and that Sadie already loved her. And that was enough for now. Western Wyoming was never kind, and kindness was exactly what this woman needed. The days that followed blurred into a tense waiting game. Jack kept a watchful eye on the road, anticipating the arrival of unwelcome visitors. The rumors swirled through Red Willow like a dust devil, growing wilder and more distorted with each passing hour. Some claimed the woman was an outlaw, wanted for murder in a neighboring territory. Others whispered she was a runaway bride, fleeing an abusive husband. Jack ignored the gossip, focusing on the woman's recovery. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to heal. He prepared simple meals, soft broth, and warm bread, which Sadie carefully fed her. He changed her bandages and offered words of comfort, though she remained silent and withdrawn. Sadie, however, refused to give up on her. She chattered endlessly, telling stories of her day, sharing her toys, and showering the woman with affection. Sometimes, late at night, Jack would catch the woman watching Sadie, a flicker of emotion in her eyes, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. He didn't force her to speak. He simply let her be, allowing her to heal at her own pace. 2 days later, the quiet of Jack Rollins's ranch had been broken by murmurs and boots crunching the gravel path. A dozen townsfolk stood outside the gate, faces pinched with concern and suspicion. Some leaned on fence posts, others held their arms crossed over thick coats. At the center stood Deputy Harmon, his hat low over his eyes, mouth set in a hard line. "You need to let us take her, Jack," he said. "A girl shows up in a bloody sack, beaten half to death, and now she's lying under your roof. That's a whole heap of trouble for one man and a child. Carry Rosie up the slope." Jack's muscles ached, but he didn't stop. Back at the ranch, he laid her by the fire and covered her in every blanket he could find. Sadie crawled beside her, holding her hand tightly. Rosie stirred once, eyelids fluttering. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely audible. Jack brushed her hair back. "Don't be," he said. "You came back. That's enough." Sadie leaned close, her voice soft. "Mama, please don't leave again." Rosie didn't reply, but a tear slid down her cheek. Outside, the wind howled over the hills. Inside, Rosie was home for now, and Jack knew they weren't just protecting her anymore. They were keeping their family whole. The storm had passed, but a colder one lingered inside the cabin. Rosie lay curled on the cot, swaddled in layers of wool in silence. Her face was pale, her lips cracked from cold and fear. Jack sat beside her, quiet. his eyes watching the flicker of firelight dance across her skin. He had not asked her why she left. Not yet. Outside, Sadie sat on the porch steps, chin tucked into her knees, hugging a ragged old doll. Rosie stirred, her eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. She looked around, confused at first, then alarmed. Her hands twitched as if to run again, but her leg betrayed her, bandaged, stiff. Jack noticed. He moved slowly, deliberately, keeping his voice low. "You're safe," he said. "You're home." Her breath quickened. I shouldn't be here." Jack reached over and poured water into a chipped tin cup, handing it to her. "You shouldn't be freezing in a ravine either," he said. "Drink." She hesitated, then took a sip. Her hands trembled. Jack set the cup down, then he leaned back in the old wooden chair beside her. "I don't know what they said to you," he began, "or what you believe about yourself, but I saw what you did." Rosie looked up, her eyes wary. "What do you mean?" Jack folded his arms. His voice was soft but certain. "That night before you left, the creek swelled from the storm. One of the colts got out, fell in. You dragged it out, risked your own life, your bad leg and all." Rosie's mouth parted in disbelief. "I saw it," Jack continued. "I was up near the shed. You didn't know anyone was watching." He paused, then said, "If you're a bad person, then you're the first bad person I've ever seen risk their neck to save a drowning horse." Roz's lips trembled. She turned her face away, ashamed. A tear rolled down her cheek. Jack leaned forward, gently dabbing the tear with a soft handkerchief, the same one his late wife once used. "I don't care who you used to be," he said. "All I know is you're the one my daughter trusts." His voice cracked slightly on that last word. Rosie began to cry in earnest, quiet, choking sobs that shook her frame. Jack didn't stop her. He just sat there, steady as the old pine walls around them. Moments later, tiny footsteps padded across the floor. Sadie stood near the edge of the cot, holding the worn doll in both hands. Her voice was timid. "Mama, she told me to give this to you." Rosie blinked through tears, confused. Sadie walked closer, lifting the doll with great care. "My mama," she said softly. "Before she went to heaven, she said, 'One day I should give this to someone brave and kind.'" Rosie reached out, almost afraid to touch it. Her fingers grazed the fabric, old but clean. Her breath caught in her throat. Sadie leaned in, hugging her gently. "That's you." Rosie wrapped her arms around the child, clutching her and the doll to her chest. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. Jack's voice answered from the chair. "Maybe not, but that doesn't mean it isn't yours." Outside, snowflakes drifted like ash over the land. Inside, a fire crackled, warm and patient. For the first time since waking in a sack under the sycamore tree, Rosie felt something shift, soft and dangerous and beautiful. Hope. Rosie sat alone beneath the cottonwood tree behind the barn. Her leg had healed, but her heart had not. The wind stirred through the branches like whispers from a life she had tried to forget, and now it was all coming back. She had been 10 when they brought her to Hollow Creek Orphanage, a bleak building at the edge of nowhere with broken windows and colder rules. The children never smiled. The adults rarely spoke except in commands. Years passed in silence and suspicion. She learned to keep her head down, her mouth shut. But the older she got, the more she noticed children disappearing in the middle of the night. New ones arriving with no names, no pasts, and no one ever asked questions until she did. "I found a ledger," she whispered one night to the wind, her hands gripping her skirt. In the attic, it had names, dates, payments. She'd been cleaning the warden's office, dusting behind the old desk, when her fingers touched a loose board. Behind it, the book had waited. Handwritten pages, careful columns, initials she remembered from bedtime roll calls. When she confronted the matron, it was like lighting a match in a dry forest. They beat her, locked her in the cellar. Then days later, the fire, it tore through the west wing of the orphanage. 2 children died. The newspapers called it a tragic accident. But Rosie knew better. It was a warning. She had buried the ledger at the base of an old tree, a twisted sycamore just beyond the fence. Then she ran, but they found her. "They thought I died," she murmured, voice shaking. "They wrapped me in a sack and dumped me like garbage." She hadn't meant to say it aloud, but Jack was standing nearby. She hadn't seen him approach. He didn't speak, not at first. Rosie turned ashamed. Her hands trembled. "I should have told you, but I thought if you knew." Her voice cracked. "You'd send me away," she finished, barely audible. Jack knelt down slowly beside her. "You buried the truth," he said softly, "and they buried you for it." She looked at him, her eyes wide and full of tears. "It's not over. They'll come again." Jack didn't flinch. Instead, he reached for her hand. His fingers were rough, warm, steady. He didn't say he believed her. He didn't say he forgave her. He just held on, and that was enough. She broke then, fully and deeply, leaning into him like a dam, finally surrendering to flood. He wrapped his arms around her and held her as she cried, as the trees swayed, as the secrets she had carried for so long finally left her in ragged breaths. Inside the cabin, Sadie was coloring with broken crayons on a wooden plank. She looked up once toward the window. She saw Rosie and her father in the distance, not speaking, just holding each other. She smiled to herself, then returned to her drawing. It was 3 stick figures, one tall, one small, one in the middle with curly hair and a dress, a family outside. The wind picked up, and beneath the earth, buried deep at the roots of a gnarled tree, the truth waited in ink and paper and silence, waiting for the day Rosie would dare to dig it back up. But for now she had something else, someone else, a place not just to survive, but to be believed, to be loved. Late afternoon, the wind heavy with storm. The knock came like thunder. Jack opened the door slowly. 2 men stood outside, one in uniform, the other with a badge pinned to a dark vest. Their horses were tied at the gate. The air between them and Jack held no warmth. "Jack Rollins?" the officer asked. Jack gave a quiet nod. "We've come for the girl. Name's Rosie Bellamy. We have a warrant issued from the state capitol. Arson, suspicion of manslaughter. She's to come with us." From inside, Rosie froze. Her name, echoed too loudly in her ears. She had known this day might come, but it still struck like lightning. Jack didn't move. "You're making a mistake," he said, voice low. The detective stepped forward. "That's not your decision. If she's innocent, she'll prove it in court." Jack turned to call for Rosie, but she was already at the door, standing behind him. Her eyes were wide but dry. There was a steadiness to her, born from nights without sleep and days carrying secrets. "I'll go," she whispered. "No," Jack said firm. Just then, a small voice broke the tension. "Wait!" Sadie darted from the kitchen, still in her boots, clutching her ragged doll. She ran between Rosie and the lawman, planting her little body like a fence. "She's my mama," she cried. "Don't take her. You can't." The wind stilled. The air inside the cabin held its breath. The officers glanced at each other, uncomfortable. One lowered his eyes. Behind them, footsteps approached from the dirt road. Townsfolk were coming. Quiet at first, then more certain. Men, women, children, farmers, storekeepers, even the blacksmith's wife. They had seen the riders they had followed. Rosie stood stunned. Then from the crowd a voice called out. "I know that girl," said an elderly woman with silver hair braided down her back. She stepped forward, cane in hand, spine straight. "I worked in Hollow Creek years ago. I know what they did." She pointed a finger at the detective. "That child is telling the truth." A murmur spread like wildfire. Heads nodded. Whispers turned into words. Words into conviction. The sheriff hesitated. "Ma'am, that's not. You'll need more than ink on paper to steal her away from us." "Now," the old woman snapped. Rosie looked to Jack, shaken, but he was already moving. He stepped forward, took her hand gently. Then, to the astonishment of all, he dropped to one knee. "If the law needs someone to speak for her, let it be me," Jack said, voice steady, gaze locked on Rosie's. "If she needs protection, I offer my name. If she needs a future, I offer my life." He pulled from his vest pocket a ring, simple silver, worn with time. "I'm not asking because of duty. I'm asking because I want this. I choose you." The sun broke through the clouds in that instant, soft gold spilling over the hills. Rosie blinked back tears. The world around her fell away. In the center stood Jack on one knee. Sadie beside him still gripping her doll, the town watching and the law waiting. She nodded. Yes, she whispered. The crowd exhaled. Someone clapped. A cheer began, cautious but rising. Even the officer cracked a small smile. Sadie beamed. See, she's ours. And that was how they stood, not as fugitives, but as a family, held together by more than names or records or laws. They were a family by choice, by love, by one brave little girl who had whispered the truth loud enough for everyone to hear. The winter passed with quiet resolve. Snow melted slowly from the ridges and green buds peeked through the earth, like hope returning after exile. Rosie had been cleared. The investigation exposed layers of corruption at the Hollow Creek home. Witnesses came forward. The names she had buried beneath an old sycamore tree, names in that leather-bound book matched the missing, the lost, the silenced. No one called her a liar anymore. And when the frost finally broke, Jack Rollins built a small arbor at top the hill behind the ranch, near the same sycamore where it had all begun. It was Sade's idea. This is where she came back to life, she said, eyes shining. So it was settled. The wedding would be there. On the morning of the ceremony, the town rose early. Someone brought quilts. Another strung up wildflowers on a rough wooden arch. The blacksmith carved 2 simple benches. Even the preacher hiked up the slope, Bible in one hand, cane in the other. Rosie stood at the base of the hill, breath caught in her throat. Her dress was plain cotton, ivory, sewn by hand with care. It had no lace, no train, but it shimmered in the sun like river water. Her hair was braided down her back. No veil, just honesty. Sade stood beside her, holding a bouquet of wild daisies and goldenrod. Her little boots kicked dust, too excited to stand still. "You ready, Mama?" she asked. Rosie looked at her, heart full. "Yes, baby, more than ever." They walked up together, hand in hand. Jack waited beneath the sycamore in his best shirt, hat pressed to his chest. His eyes never left Rosie. The preacher raised his voice above the soft wind. "Marriage," he said, "is not the union of 2 perfect people. It is the promise of 2 imperfect hearts to stay when storms howl and rivers rise. It is standing firm side by side when the world says run." He looked at Rosie, then at Jack. "I ask you now, do you choose this life, this bond, this love?" "I do," Jack said. "I do," Rosie echoed, voice steady. The preacher nodded. "Then by the strength given me, and the truth lived between you, I pronounce you husband and wife." Jack stepped forward, cupped Rosie's cheek and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You didn't just survive," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. "You brought us back to life." Tears brimmed in her eyes. Sadie cheered, leaping into their arms. The crowd clapped. Some wiped their eyes. Others laughed softly. The wind swirled through the grass like a hymn. Later that afternoon, the 3 of them rode together down the hill. Rosie sat behind Jack, arms wrapped around him. Sadie sat on her own little pony beside them, giggling with delight. "Mama," she called, "let's race." Rosie laughed, sunlight in her voice. "All right, sweetheart, but don't go easy on me." The horses thundered into the field, past fences and flowers, through the open land where love had taken root. The past was not forgotten, but it no longer held them. Together they galloped toward the future, toward spring, toward the promise of every sunrise yet to come. If Rosie, Jack, and little Sade's story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Drop a comment below. What did you feel when Sadie whispered, "Mama"? Smash that hype button if you believe stories like this deserve to be shared far and wide. And make sure to subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales of unlikely love, quiet bravery, and second chances in the rugged American frontier. We tell the stories, but you keep them alive. See you in the next one.